You are not afraid of death, you are afraid of whispers. The banquet is long over. Silver platters have been scraped clean, the dancers dismissed, the wine drained like blood from the throat. And yet you sit in the throne room, still, listening, not to music, not to counsel, but to the silence. Because somewhere beneath that silence, in the walls, in the servants' eyes, in the soft rustle of court gowns, you hear it again. The rumor, the story that will make you a fool. The lie that will birth 1,000 more. So you do what any king does when his crown feels to light. You summon your advisers, you smile, you nod. And then you boil them in oil, not because they betrayed you, but because they might. And because nothing drowns a whisper better than a scream. You are 5 years old the first time you hear someone laugh at your name. It comes from behind a tapestry, a servant girl whispering to another that it sounds too delicate for a king. You don't understand what that means, but the shame nestles deep, curling somewhere beneath your ribs. Your mother is too beautiful to look at and too silent to question. Your father, a man who believes emotions are weaknesses, does not explain things, he demonstrates them. You learn to flinch before you're hit, to nod before you understand, to smile before you feel anything at all. The palace is filled with mirrors, but none reflect who you are, only who you're expected to become. You walk its halls as though you're already being watched, and in many ways you are. Guards, tutors, priests, all circling like moons around a too young sun. They think you're soft. You feel it, even before they say it. Your voice is quiet, your steps careful, your hands too clean. You begin to listen, not to learn, but to survive. You know who is sleeping with whom, who drinks too much, who fears your father more than death. You tuck away secrets like coins under your tongue. It becomes your power, your only inheritance. While other boys play with swords, you collect whispers. You don't speak them, not yet, but you hold them close, like weapons you might someday need. One night, you find your nursemaid crying in the corridor. She doesn't see you. She's clutching a letter. You hear only one word, execution, and you realize, in this palace, stories kill faster than daggers. From that moment, you stop trusting anyone who smiles, and you start imagining how silence can be enforced, not asked for, not begged for, but forced, like a crown pushed down on a resisting skull. They call your father a great man, in public. But you see the truth in how people walk around him, backs stiff, voices too bright, hands trembling just enough to betray the lie. He rules not with love, but with anticipation, a kind of terror that makes people punish themselves before he has to. You watch him during court sessions, how he turns truth into clay and reshapes it to fit his needs. You begin to study his cruelty the way other boys study scripture. You think maybe that's what kingship is, not wisdom, not justice, but the art of knowing when to strike, and how hard. But beneath your careful watching, something darker is growing. You begin to imagine things that haven't happened yet. A guard slipping poison into your tea, a servant leaving your door open so assassins might slip in at night. You ask your tutor why the royal chambers have no locks. He chuckles, because a king should fear nothing, but you do. And because of that, you begin to build your kingdom in reverse, not from the throne outward, but from the shadows inward. You learn to mimic your father's voice in private, repeating his phrases, his sneers, even when no one's watching. You watch him bathed in oils poured by trembling hands, and wonder how it feels to be touched only because someone fears you. You begin to write names in a little leather book, not of enemies, but of potential ones. People who hesitate too long, people who don't laugh fast enough, people who ask too many questions. One day, your mother disappears for 3 weeks. When she returns, her eyes no longer meet yours. No one explains where she went. You stop asking questions, but that's when the dream begins. The same one, every night. You're standing in the middle of the throne room. Everyone's backs are turned. They're whispering. And when you call out, they don't hear you, because they no longer fear you. And that, more than death, is what keeps you awake. By 14, you've learned to listen so well that silence becomes unbearable. You hear meaning in the absence of sound, suspicion in the curve of a smile. When nobles kneel, you watch their hands, not their eyes. You begin to correct people before they finish speaking, not because you're impatient, but because you already know what they're about to say. One day, a court painter arrives to sketch your portrait. He tries to soften your image, to paint you as graceful, golden, full of light. You order the painting burned. That is not who you are. That is not what the throne will require of you. You begin reading histories of other kings, the ones who ruled through force, through terror, through silence. You underline passages about execution, about betrayal, about rumor. Your father begins to fall ill. Not dramatically, but slowly, like a statue cracking from the inside. The palace adjusts itself around his weakness, but you notice. You begin attending council meetings. At first, you say nothing. You only watch. The advisors speak in riddles, masking insults in poetry. You start correcting them, one by one, mid-sentence, and they begin to fear you, just a little. It's intoxicating. When your father dies, they expect you to mourn. But all you feel is the weight of your own name, and no longer whispered, but shouted in coronation halls. You are king now. No more leather book of suspicions. No more quiet dreaming. The fear you've studied your whole life will now flow the other way. You will make sure of it. In your first act as sovereign, you dismiss 3 advisors for dishonesty of tone. They beg to stay. You let them go, for now. But the names stay in your mouth like a stone. The boy who listened too much has become the man everyone listens to. But your ears have not stopped hearing. They never will. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the palace, you still hear them, laughing. It was supposed to be your triumph, the coronation. The moment when the boy would vanish, and the king would rise. The bells rang, the crowds cheered, the throne room bloomed with silk and silver. But as you walked the length of the crimson carpet, past rows of perfumed nobles and hollow smiles, you felt nothing. No power, no glory. Only the sickening awareness that everyone here was pretending to love you, pretending to obey, pretending you belonged. You knew the truth even then. Power does not live in robes or rings. It lives in the silences between words, in the hesitations before bows, in the conversations that stop. When you enter the room, you watch the bishops bless your rule with trembling hands. You watched your mother, now veiled and quiet as a ghost, sit still as marble. And above it all, the chandeliers swayed, like gallows waiting for their moment. That night, after the ceremony, your ministers gathered to toast your reign. They called you His Majesty the Bold, the Scholar King, the future of the realm. But you heard what they really meant. Too young, too strange, too fragile. You smiled. You toasted back. You noted which ones didn't drink, and then you dismissed them all, except 3. These 3, you said, would be your private circle. Your bloodless brothers. They bowed, grateful. And in the days that followed, you listened. You let them advise you. Let them believe you needed them. Let them whisper behind your back, until one morning, you invited them to a private garden. You fed them honeyed figs and offered them wine. And then, just as the sun rose behind the chapel windows, you told them what you knew. Every word, every plan, every doubt. Their faces collapsed into horror. And you simply smiled and said, "This is how a king listens." You did not execute them. Not yet. Mercy is more terrifying than violence. You let them leave, but they never spoke carelessly again. And neither did anyone else. You begin to reshape the court like a sculptor wielding a blade instead of a chisel. Gone are the laughing poets, the veiled jesters, the women who speak too freely. In their place come the watchers, men with quiet mouths and sharp eyes. Your court becomes a theater of silence, where every word carries weight and every gaze might be a test. You walk among them like a phantom draped in velvet and suspicion, and they bowed not out of love, but because they do not know what you already know. That fear moves faster than loyalty. You institute new rituals. Every document must be read aloud before it's signed. Every messenger is searched for hidden ink. You place your seal on mirrors. You burn the portraits of your father, not out of disrespect, but to remind them, you are not him. You are worse. The clergy protests your new taxes. So you host a grand sermon. Midway through, you interrupt the bishop and ask him to recite the prayer for obedience, backwards. When he stutters, you smile, and dismiss the entire religious council for lack of memory. By the end of the month, 3 disappear. The rest never question you again. Behind closed doors, the nobles begin to whisper, he is not a man. He is a mirror that remembers too much. You like that. You feed it. You leak letters from the palace, forged, yes, but perfectly phrased, to make your enemies believe they're being watched even when they're not. And soon, they are watching each other. Betrayal becomes a currency. Servants report on their masters. Daughters on their mothers. No one knows who your informants are, only that they exist. And in the middle of it all, you sit, quiet, calculating, listening. Your power is not in your armies. It's in your ears, and now the entire palace speaks not to you, but for you, like a mouth trying to stay alive. There is a moment, late one evening, when your mother finds you alone in the candlelit war room, maps sprawled like wounds across the table, red ink blotting out cities you've never even visited. She doesn't speak. She only watches. You feel her gaze like a draft through a sealed room. When she finally does speak, it is soft, trembling. You are becoming your father. You look up, smile. No, you whisper. He trusted people. She says nothing after that, just leaves. And the silence she leaves behind feels louder than any accusation. But you don't regret what you're becoming. You believe what you've built is not cruelty, it is protection. You are the dam holding back the flood of lies, betrayal, softness. You are the noise that drowns out the whispers, and if that means ruling alone, so be it. You begin rewriting court laws, not to create order, but to confuse. The rules change by the week, sometimes the hour. What was legal in the morning becomes treason by sunset. The nobles tremble. They dare not sleep soundly, even their dreams. Betray them now. You have created a world where no one knows what truth looks like, except you. And that is the throne you truly sit on. Not wood, not gold, but knowledge. You learn that control is not about fear of death, it's about fear of not knowing when it might come. You test this theory. A merchant is accused of gossip. You let him live. A chambermaid is praised by a duchess. She disappears. Soon, everyone understands. Your wrath is not logical. It is divine. The court changes. Laughter vanishes. Conversations become hushed riddles. You hear your name less and less, not because it is forgotten, but because it has become sacred. Too dangerous to speak aloud. They have crowned you with silence. And you wear it like a second skin. It began with a laugh. Just one, too loud, too long, too carelessly thrown across the banquet table like a dagger wrapped in velvet. You were sipping wine when it happened. The minister's mouth twisted into something joyful, but the sound sliced through the room like thunder. And then, quiet, a glance, a flicker of tension. The man beside him coughed to cover it. But you heard it. The laugh wasn't for you. It was about you. You felt it in your spine. It burned hotter than the wine in your throat. That night, you didn't sleep. You sat by the fire in your private study, running the moment through your mind again and again. The tone, the timing, the smirk. You no longer trusted the laughter of men. You barely trusted silence. And that was when the idea came. Not punishment. Not execution. Lesson. If words could ripple through your palace like poison, then you needed an antidote they'd never forget. The kitchens were called at dawn, fires stoked, iron cauldrons brought up from the servant quarters. Your physicians measured the perfect temperature, high enough to blister flesh on contact, slow enough for the screams to last. You ordered a platform built in the cellar beneath the palace, the same cellar where your father once stored wine and mercy. Now it would serve a better purpose. You called it the chamber of cleansing, a place where disloyalty could be purified. The irony pleased you. So did the panic it inspired. Rumors spread fast. Faster than your horses, faster than fire, and that's exactly what you wanted. By the time you summoned the first advisor, the one with the laugh, he already knew what was coming, but he came anyway. Because no one refuses the king, especially not the one who listens in the dark. He knelt before you, the man who once called himself your mentor. His robes were spotless, his voice cracked only once. You asked him to repeat what he'd said at the banquet. He claimed he didn't remember. You leaned closer, smiled, and whispered, "Then I'll help you forget everything else." The guards didn't move until you blinked. That was your signal now, not words, just a breath, a gesture, a look. He was dragged to the chamber without ceremony. No trial, no defense. Just the hiss of fire and the slow, dreadful music of chains. You watched through a lattice window, carved into the stone wall like a cathedral confessional. You insisted on that. You wanted to see what fear looked like when it broke. The oil bubbled like breathing skin. The scent of burning flesh would stay with you for days, clinging to your clothes, your hair, your dreams. And yet, you didn't look away. You couldn't. You needed to see it, needed them all to see that you saw it. That this wasn't madness. This was method. After it was done, you had the chamber washed and sealed. No ashes, no bones, just heat and silence, and a smell the maids could never fully scrub from the walls. You returned to court that evening as though nothing had happened. You even hosted a dinner, toasted to loyalty, served pork glazed in honey, and waited for someone to choke. No one did, but they barely breathed. That was your favorite part. The way their hands trembled while lifting their goblets. The way their eyes flicked toward the cellar doors every time the wind howled down the corridor. You had boiled one man, but it was enough, because in the right system, you don't need to kill everyone. You just need to make sure they believe they could be next. And now they did. The court was yours. Not by law, not by blood, but by fear. And fear, you had learned, was the only throne no one dared to steal. You refined it. That's what power demands, refinement. The second execution came weeks later, quieter, colder. This one didn't even plead. He only asked for a letter to be delivered to his daughter. You allowed it, of course. Not out of kindness, but calculation. Let them think you could be merciful. That unpredictability itself was your mercy. The chamber was now fully furnished. Iron hooks for restraints, padded walls to muffle echoes, scented oils burned overhead to disguise the stench. It was no longer just a place of death. It was your theater. And the palace understood this. Ministers began arriving early to court, their hands sweating onto polished cane handles. Courtiers offered gifts with trembling fingers, whispering prayers you never taught them. And still, the rumors grew. Some said you boiled traitors alive. Others said you made them watch as others burned. A few believed the chamber didn't exist at all, that it was just a myth, a trick of your design. You loved that theory most of all. Because it meant your greatest weapon wasn't the oil, it was doubt. The possibility of pain became more effective than pain itself. Every cracked floorboard, every echo down a stone corridor, every glance from a servant, all became part of your machine. A machine of fear. And yet, even machines make noise. One morning, as you walked the gallery alone, you heard something different. Not a whisper, not a plea. A laugh. Faint, female, echoing through a tapestry-lined hall like a ghost you'd forgotten to bury. You froze, turned, but there was no one there. For the first time in years, your heart raced not with power, but with panic. Because now they were using the silence, turning it back against you. And you realized, boiling one advisor had silenced 1,000 voices, but it had also created 1,000 more you couldn't see. Shadows move quickly in a kingdom ruled by fire, and yours had started to flicker. You begin covering the mirrors, all of them, one by one. The gilt-framed ovals in the guest chambers, the polished silver in your dressing rooms, even the grand Venetian glass in the throne hall. You tell the servants it's superstition. Too many reflections invite spirits. But the truth is simpler. You no longer trust what you see. One morning, you catch your own eyes in the wash basin. The face looking back is not yours, or rather, it is yours, but too still, too pale, too knowing. You see the kings who came before you in the curve of your brow. You see your father in the cruel set of your mouth. You see fear, not in your enemies, but in your own pupils. And it shakes you, the first time in years. You look away. But the image lingers. That's when the scratching begins, quiet at first, in the walls, behind the wainscoting. The servants say it's rats, but you know better. You know how rumors move, low, unseen, nesting in the silence. The courtiers still bow, the generals still obey. But now they avoid your gaze, as if they'd see something in your reflection you cannot name. You summon the court painter again. You order a new portrait, this time honest. No softness, no flattery, just truth. He paints for a week. When he unveils it, you're silent. It's perfect, too perfect. You order destroyed. Because if the people see you as you are, as you feel, the spell breaks. Power, you realize, is an illusion, but one you must believe in more than anyone else, so you straighten your crown. You rehearse your smile. You begin speaking in the third person, a king talking about the king, as if he is no longer human at all. It helps, a little. But the mirrors remain covered, because deep down, you know, no kingdom can silence every voice, not even the one inside your skull. The palace, once alive with cautious ritual, is now a mausoleum. Candles are left burning long after they've been needed, as if light itself has become afraid to go out. Even your most loyal guards keep their hands too close to their swords, their eyes darting toward shadows that weren't there yesterday. You feel it too, the shift, the thickening air. The way the silence no longer obeys you. It waits, watches, presses in around your ears like a fog. You begin to suspect the walls are listening. That somewhere, behind the stone, behind the doors you never open, there are voices repeating your name, not with reverence, but with venom. You search for their source. You change your food tasters weekly. You burn every letter before reading it. You switch rooms without warning. At night, you sleep with a dagger beneath your pillow, though your dreams betray you anyway. Always the same, a faceless figure in the mirror, not laughing, just watching. One morning, you wake to find red wax smeared across your chamber door, a symbol you don't recognize. You ask the guards. They claim ignorance. You ask again. Their voices tremble. One is found dead the next day, not by your hand, but someone else's. A message, perhaps, or a warning. The terror you once wielded so perfectly is now circling back, like a dog off its leash. You begin conducting court from behind a curtain. You say it's for health, privacy, sanctity, but everyone knows the truth. The king no longer trusts the eyes of men. You ask fewer questions. You issue more commands, short, sharp, absolute. And yet, the rumors grow. They say your skin has turned gray from lack of sunlight, that you speak only in riddles, that your soul has left your body and now haunts the tower where the oil chamber once burned. You don't bother correcting them. Let them speak, let them invent monsters, so long as they fear the thing in the mirror, even if that thing is no longer you. They bring you portraits now instead of mirrors, paintings to carefully pose to be real, faces smoothed by loyalty or fear. But even these you slash to ribbons when no one is watching. You cannot bear to look at her, the woman you once were, the softness in her eyes, the illusion of control. She is dangerous because she still believes. You, on the other hand, have learned. There is no safety in beauty, no protection in favor. You have watched the prettiest girls die the cruelest deaths, not by blade, but by betrayal, gossip, and silence. You see now that the true war was never on battlefields but in drawing rooms, in whispered glances, in the soft hiss of a lady's maid folding a gown for a woman no longer favored. So you become invisible, not with magic but with fear. You let the world forget your real face. You surround yourself with veils, shadows, emissaries who speak for you, always beginning their messages with, His Majesty commands. They forget what you sound like, what you smell like, what moves you. And slowly, you slip beyond reach, but with disappearance comes paranoia. You begin to suspect that even your most trusted advisors have never seen you, that they serve a ghost, that perhaps they prefer it that way. After all, a ghost can't age, can't bleed, can't lose, but ghosts also can't touch, can't be loved. You test them. You release conflicting orders. You lie, then watch who corrects you. You send one courtier to the dungeons for addressing you by your old title. Another you promote for daring to call you nothing at all. The game has changed, and you are the only one who understands the rules. The others, they think you've gone mad, that the king has been replaced by something else, something colder. They aren't wrong, because what stares back at you in the rare moments you pass a darkened window is no longer a man. It is the thing that made you into, the thing you chose to become, and it does not blink. No trumpets sounded, no crowd screamed, no bishop lifted a crown above your head and declared you divine. Your coronation happened in silence, not in a cathedral, but in the slow, merciless echo of absence. One by one, the voices that questioned you fell away. Some to exile, some to illness, some simply stopped speaking. They say a ruler is made by blood or God or the will of the people, but yours was made in fear, fear you sculpted with exquisite care. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't need to. You learned that a pause was more terrifying than a command. That silence, wielded properly, could break men faster than any sword. And so, you let the silence do the work. You entered rooms without speaking, and still they bowed. You left letters unsigned, and still your orders were obeyed. You no longer needed to touch power, it moved before you like a tide. And in this silence, something strange began to happen. The palace, once filled with color and music, began to resemble a tomb. Curtains drawn, laughter muffled, the scent of roses replaced with something colder like metal or memory. The walls stopped echoing your name, not because they forgot, but because they dared not speak it, and perhaps that was the point. Not to be known, but to be unknowable, because what is unknowable becomes untouchable, and what is untouchable becomes immortal. But even immortality has a price. You began to miss noise, not the noise of politics or celebration, but the human kind, a child's cry, a lover's sigh, the breath of someone not afraid to speak near you, but none came. You had crowned yourself, not in gold, but in absence. And now your throne was empty even when you sat in it. Because what is a kingdom where no one dares to sing? Where even the birds stop at the gates? You got what you wanted, a reign with no resistance, a name that inspired trembling. But no one warned you that silence, once complete, becomes its own kind of scream. There were portraits of you, of course, more than ever before. Draped in sable, framed by velvet, gazing somewhere just above the eye. But they didn't capture your face. Not really. They captured a warning, a mask, an image so carefully composed it erased the girl beneath it. You had become a symbol, and symbols do not blink, or weep, or grow tired. You noticed how the courtiers lowered their eyes longer than necessary. How the maids no longer brush your hair with idle chatter. Even the guards, who once joked in your presence, now stood motionless, hands trembling just slightly against steel. You were revered, but reverence is only adoration stripped of warmth. It is worship without love, and slowly, you realized you weren't ruling a court anymore, you were haunting it. Every step you took left silence in its wake, like a ghost passing through velvet halls. And when you finally spoke, they listened not with ears, but with fear. You had become prophecy, legend, threat. But not human, not woman, not even queen. Just the absence of anything they could question, and that's when the loneliness set in. A loneliness so vast it echoed, not outside, but inside. You would lie awake in silks that had once felt luxurious and now felt like chains. You would wake to rooms so quiet they felt airless. You would sit at banquets where no one dared raise a glass before you did, and when they did, they only drank after. Yours had been tested, not for poison, but for permission. Every day you lived like this, you grew more distant from the very people you ruled. And the irony cut deeper than any rebellion ever could. You had spent your whole life trying to be heard. Now, they heard only you, and you could hear no one. Silence had crowned you, silence had protected you. And silence, in the end, had stolen the only thing you didn't know you still needed. Someone who could say your name, not with fear, but with love. And so the ritual began, not with trumpets, but with whispers. You were dressed like a bride of empire, but you moved like a ghost through the candlelit corridors, past courtiers who bowed to low, and servants who dared not look. They said you were lucky, chosen, divine, but beneath the veil, your mouth tasted of blood and milk, a blend of childhood and sacrifice. In the chapel, they crowned you not with gold, but with silence. The crown was too large. It slid down your brow like a yoke. The weight of it carved a question into your spine. Who are you now, if not his? They chanted Latin. You mouthed nothing. The priest touched your forehead with oil, but it did not bless, it branded. A symbol for a future that had already taken root in your womb, in your name, in the ink of 1,000 treaties signed in your absence. Outside, bells rang like morning. Inside, you stood still as a statue, a relic carved for a kingdom that needed your body, not your voice. The moment they placed the scepter in your hand, you felt the irony. They were calling you queen, but you had never felt less sovereign. Applause rose, and still, you said nothing, because that, too, had been rehearsed. Even your silence was ceremonial, even your obedience was weaponized. The coronation ended, you were crowned, but something in you did not kneel. Something in you stayed standing, quiet and awake. You are 16 again, the silk still clings to your skin. The bed waits behind you, but this time, you do not walk toward it. You look at the linen and realize it was never about you. Not your blood, not your innocence. It was about the performance, about control, about history needing a spectacle to believe a woman was worthy. But what if you didn't give them the ending they rehearsed? What if your silence had been your rebellion all along? They wrote that you bathed in milk to preserve your beauty, but they never wrote about the pain it took to stay beautiful. About the cracked nipples, the weeping breasts of the mothers you never met. About the shame they swallowed to feed your legend. You were their queen, but only because their labor made you one. Now, centuries later, your portrait still hangs, a flawless, serene, skin like ivory. But it tells no truth, not of the voices silenced beneath your softness, not of the hundreds of bodies wrung dry so yours could shimmer. You became immortal not through love or rule, but through myth, through the taste of milk and iron and silence. And when they call you divine, they forget divinity is often built on broken backs and quiet mouths. The girl they crowned did not survive. But the woman who emerged, layered in silk, soaked in sorrow, silent but unyielding, she stayed, not in books, not in statues, but in the unanswered questions, in the shadows behind every throne, in the weight of what history omits. And if you listen closely, you'll hear her still, not screaming, not begging, but whispering, I was never yours, not really, not ever.